Thank you so much for spending your time sharing your experiences as a leader here. Now, you've been wearing many hats. You've been a military leader, you've been a political leader as a minister before, and currently you're a business leader. So how different are these experiences of yours?
Somehow I don't resonate very well when you use the word leader. Yes, I was in the Army and Air Force. I had certain responsibilities, but I always worked with people. So I don't quite associate with the word leader, capital L. My reaction may describe my own attitude towards leadership, that it's always collective work, and if you're able to achieve anything, it's because others have worked with you, and you were able to align what you want to do with what they are prepared to do, and then you're able to make certain achievements. Yeah.
What was your favorite when you were in the military, in politics, or currently in business, in the private sector?
I've thought over that question many a time. I find it difficult to point to somebody and say, well, I want to be like him. I think depending on the situation, you need different kinds of leaders. And it's not as if a person can lead in all situations. In some situations, it's better to have a young person leading you. In other situations, it may be better to have a commando or a professor. I can probably do certain things in certain situations, but I won't be able to do many things in many situations. Yeah.
So you're saying that when you were in politics,
yes,
you needed a different set of skills than you use now as a business leader?
No, I got to work within what I am, and it's the same person in whatever role that I played. I don't think I've changed. I don't think people can change very much. It's like you attend an old school reunion and you meet old classmates, you're all much older now. But after 5 minutes, you come to the conclusion that no one has changed. And that's probably how they see you too. So I don't think we can change very much. So
I remember, in terms of values,
yes,
the values that actually you carry into, the various roles that you played.
Yes.
You talked about being a Chinese, and you had a bit of an affinity to the Taoist values system, yeah? And you're also a Christian, a Catholic. How far do these values, are they, do they drive how you are in your various, in the various areas?
Being Chinese is a very important part of my identity, and I certainly hope that I've transmitted that identity to my children. If they don't feel Chinese, I would have, in my own view, feel as a father. So that's important to me. I'm also a Christian, a Catholic. That's important to me. But I accept that in matters of religious belief, every individual must make his own judgment and decision. So yes, I'm animated by certain deep values which won't change very much. Being Chinese is about a Confucianist view of the world, that you need relationships, you need to observe protocols, you need a historical view of things, but also to accept that as the Taoists do, that there are always forces much larger than us, affecting our room for maneuver, affecting our ability to be free. And recognizing these necessities is absolutely important. So we're all nested within larger forces which are completely beyond our control. We can't change the seasons, we can't alter the rotation of the earth or its revolution around the sun. And you have to accept that's reality. The seasons change, we grow older, and these are unalterable. But within where we are, there is room for maneuver. And one philosopher, I think it was Friedrich Engels, who said, freedom is a recognition of necessity. And I've always accepted that at the core, which is why I'm quite happy to describe myself as a philosophical Taoist. Yeah.
How far does that affect the kind of decisions that you make on a daily basis? in your capacity, let's say?
Very much, very much. You know that famous prayer that you how does it go? You do the things you can, you accept what you cannot change, and you pray for the wisdom to know in which situation you are in. So always understand what is very difficult to change and what within it. In your relationships, in the particular situation, it's an analysis of forces. I mean, you read it in Sun Tzu Ping Fa, you must know the situation, you must know your opponent, you must know yourself. And then within this knowledge, you find your room for maneuver.
Okay, let's just talk about your time as Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yes.
What do you think are some of the biggest lessons you actually learned about diplomacy, about statecraft during that period of your career?
Relationships are very important, and one should never neglect nurturing relationships. The former US Secretary of State, George Yeo, put it very well when he explained that a large part of foreign policy is gardening work. If you do your gardening, then the problems stay small, and when there are problems, they can be kept small. But if you neglect the gardening, then suddenly things happen, and small things become big, and little efforts which would have been sufficient are no longer enough. So gardening is very important. One must also be an absolute realist in foreign policy. There are big forces at play. You must understand them. People are animated by all kinds of things, and we are dealing with a particular country or individual. Understanding background, history is absolutely important. Then you know what's important to the other person, and you must know what's important to you. So what's not important to you, we are prepared to trade for something which is more important to you. And that's how we can achieve win-win outcomes. Yeah. Respect, understanding of the other party is absolutely critical in the search for win-win solutions.
What were some of your biggest challenges at that time?
When I became Foreign Minister, the biggest problem was our relations with China after DPM Lee Hsien Loong's visit to Taiwan, which was played up way beyond what was allowable and which caused problems for China, to which they reacted in a very robust way. And that was my first responsibility, which was to re-establish good relations with China.
Mm-hmm. What did you learn from that episode?
But specifically with China, that the signals are subtle. The process of accommodation takes time. One must be patient, and one must be a good listener, and pick up nuances along the way, and accepting that they will also do the same on their side. So when we deal with the Chinese side of us comes into play. It's different if you're dealing with, say, India or Australia or Indonesia. Mm-hmm. Part of the strength of being Singaporean is a certain multi-channel facility that we know in this situation we should be differently nuanced. Mm-hmm. And we do this every day. We do this almost subconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Given China's position right now, how do you think? What do you think are the challenges to ASEAN? Given China, not just China, China and India, the so-called superpowers of the region. What do you think are ASEAN's challenges moving ahead?
The rise of China is the single biggest thing happening on Earth today. And I've described it this way, that it's as if another sun is entering the solar system. And when another sun enters the solar system, it alters the gravitational field and the orbital freedom of every planetary body, of every planet, every asteroid, every comet in the solar system. And this sun is growing very fast and will eventually become bigger than the original sun and will create a completely different dispensation all around us. This gives us an extraordinary opportunity to choose. It's also very dangerous. But no one can afford to do nothing, because even if you do nothing, you're affected. But it's important to be conscious of the forces at play, that this is something big, something which affects us in every way, and in a thoughtful way respond to a new situation. It is a new situation, there's no going back to the past. Specifically as to how China will behave, China in some ways is very predictable, because its history goes through cycles of 200-300 years. And you can almost, in some situations, predict pretty accurately how the Chinese will react. And they are not like the Americans. The Americans have this almost innocent view that the whole world should be like them. So they go to Iraq, they go to Afghanistan, they go to Syria, and they go to Libya, and they hope that everybody can become American and democratic, and we all live happily ever after. The Chinese, who are an old civilization, they know that's not possible. And that if you try to do that, far from improving the situation, you make it worse. So their approach is, I have enough difficulties with my own family, please look after yours. I'm in no position to tell you what to do. But whatever happens, as neighbors, if you can cooperate, let's cooperate and help each other. That's their approach. Yeah.
What about the rest of ASEAN, the other member nations? Traditionally there is this policy.
Going back to the new sun entering the solar system, we are a cluster of planets very close to the new sun. And it shows in everything, in the tourist arrivals, in our trade accounts, in investment flows. So no one wants China as an enemy, because everyone wants China as a market, as an investor, as a trading partner, as a source of tourist arrivals. And in an interesting way, the closer you are to China, the more you want the Americans and the Europeans and the Japanese to be present too, because then it gives you more bargaining space, more room for maneuver. I think the Chinese understand this. I remember when Zhu Rongji proposed a free trade agreement between China and ASEAN in the year 2010. The framework agreement was signed in 2012 in Phnom Penh. And Zhu Rongji, during the signing ceremony, said China does not expect to seek for itself. So China does not seek for itself an exclusive position in Southeast Asia. In other words, China knows that the more relaxed you are in your relationships, the better our bilateral relationship will be. If a neighbor of China is trapped in their relationship, like North Korea, it is not a healthy relationship, and it is a tense relationship.
Well, during your tenure as Foreign Affairs Minister, ASEAN leaders actually adopted the AEC blueprint. And of course, last year it actually launched the AEC. What do you think ASEAN could do to further break the barriers of this of economic integration?
Well, I think we're making progress year by year. AEC last year was not a dramatic movement. It was just a milestone that we have registered for ourselves. We were converging onto it for many years. There's still a long way to go. It's a journey. Mutual recognition of standards, services, trade, creating greater trust, border procedures. These things will take time. I think we're getting better and better. ASEAN has a flexible geometry. It's not rigid. It's got a loose structure, so we allow for divergencies. You can have a military government in Thailand. You can have a Duterte in the Philippines. ASEAN adjusts. We just, it's like 10 boats rafted together. A wave could come, but we find our balance without breaking off. And that's ASEAN. If we were rigid like the EU, we will break up. Yeah. The reason why we are what we are is because we adapt flexibly to forces much larger than us and which affect us and are not within our control.
And because you were there when it was first developed, do you think it's going, AEC is going the way you feel it should go?
ASEAN has been a remarkable success. We're entering its 50th year. There's much to celebrate. And the most important achievement of ASEAN is maintaining the peace in Southeast Asia. For years, Southeast Asia was divided into two halves because of the war in Indochina. That's over. And now from Vietnam all the way to Papua, from Myanmar to Mindanao. We have a zone of relative peace, and even though there are differences, there are bilateral conflicts, there are challenges, there are changes of government, there are coups, but the habit of meeting, of commentating each other, of not overly judging each other, of accepting diversity, that's become ingrained in us and helped us in our adjustment to a changing world.
And the policy of non-intervention, is it still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. We are neighbors in a village. If we are constantly poking our nose into each other's affair, it will be a very unhappy village. But we're neighbors, and we're neighbors. We've got to look after common areas, we've got to maintain a certain civility, we must have gotong royong, and that's what ASEAN is.
You don't think that this policy of non-interference is making it difficult to tackle certain issues, for example, transboundary haze, or even the issues of Myanmar previously?
No, it helped. In fact, without ASEAN, the miracle that we have seen in Myanmar of a peaceful transition could not have happened.
Were there challenges created?
No, mutual non-interference is not an absolute principle. When they were shooting monks in Yangon in 2008, and Singapore was in the chair, we took a very firm position, expressing our common revulsion. And when they kept on talking about a timetable to democracy without a timeline, we told them it was not credible. There was moral pressure, there was peer pressure, there were discussions. Every ASEAN meeting they attended, they came under pressure. We did not force them, we expressed our views, they gave their reasons, we gave our responses to their explanations. And the pressure was maintained by persuasion, by osmosis, through friendship, through mutual affection. We do influence one another, but we don't send commandos across, we don't embargo, we don't put pressure, apply sanctions. No, we don't do that. The Western powers wanted us to do that against the military government in Myanmar. We refused. Then when the change finally happened, foreign minister of a major European country who had also stepped down like me, we had lunch in Europe. So he said, so you were right after all. So they considered that the approach of engagement in the end facilitated the transition. That if we had been ideological, doctrinaire embargo, the situation would have become worse. And this peaceful transition could not have happened. Indonesia went through hell after the Asian financial crisis. Suharto had to resign, new dispensation, a succession of not very stable administrations. But in the end, today we have Indonesia, which is full of hope. And all that within the framework of ASEAN, keeping the place intact, keeping out external interference, and maintaining the overall peace and conditions for cooperation and progress. Yeah. Now, ASEAN has been remarkable.
You mentioned Myanmar, and of course ASEAN has engaged Myanmar, previously. How has Singapore's engagement with Myanmar evolved, over time? How do you see it has changed over time?
We took a practical view. I remember accompanying Lee Kuan Yew to Myanmar in 1986, I think. I was still in the SAF, a colonel, and Nevin was his host, and they knew each other from way back. And Lee Kuan Yew, in one of the dinner speeches, said, well, we've taken different paths, but we wish you all the best. It was a mild criticism, but expressed with affection, and both sides determined to keep good relations. And then after that, it got worse. The military government became rigid, sometimes very harsh. We had to hold our noses. Then when something terrible happened, like the Yangon shootings, we took a clear position. Then when I came back, I went to the Burmese temple at Ahut Road, and I met Aung San Suu Kyi's supporters to signal that, no, our support for the government does not mean that we don't support the other people who live in Myanmar. And so in the end, we became friends with all sides. And I invited Aung San Suu Kyi here for the Singapore Summit. She came and she expressed great friendship towards the Singapore people. And we still have our links to the military. And that's what a good neighbor should be, to be a conciliator, not to add fuel to the fire, not to whisper and make things worse, but to help family members come together again. Yeah.
And it's this quality within ASEAN you feel that has allowed the region to succeed? As you said,
I think there's such an instinct. There's such an instinct. Yeah. There's a feeling that, look, I know it's hard enough for you within your family. We should not make things harder for you. We should, in fact, try to make things easier for you. Yeah. And I hope that when it's our turn, you'll do the same for me.
Now, with Myanmar opening up more opportunities, do you think, what kind of challenges as well as opportunities does it present for the rest of the region?
Well, Myanmar is the last piece brought into the 21st century in Southeast Asia. It shares a long border with India and China. Both are now building infrastructure into Myanmar. Myanmar will enable ASEAN to be a connector between China and India. And this is a very big deal. So if we have good relations with both India and China, and both are rising powers, by 2050, China is likely to be the biggest economy in the world. India may well be the second. Certainly, it will at least be the third. And we are right in between. It will bring prosperity to the entire region. Provided we don't do silly things to ourselves.
Any challenges you see to what's happening in Myanmar? It's opening up.
Huge challenges. I mean, they've been kept back for so long. It will take them a generation before getting things fully sorted out. The relationship between the army and the state structure, the many minority groups who are still armed, who will not be disarmed because of the distrust. There's a problem in the Rakhine state. There's a problem of economic development, of inadequate administrative capacity, and Aung San Suu Kyi's successors. Yeah. So,
and how do you think the rest of ASEAN can? Is there a place for the rest of ASEAN to help mitigate these challenges?
We should always be helpful. We should not interfere, but we should always be helpful. So trade between Thailand and Myanmar growing. The border crossings are chuck-along. Singapore and other countries are all doing what they can to add capacity, to train. The Chinese are helping a lot, so to the Japanese and others. Yeah.
Can I go back to what you brought up about the demonstrations in Myanmar?
Yes.
What were your considerations on how much pressure to put on the Myanmar government at that time?
Yeah, I remember at the time, we were all in New York, the foreign ministers. Lee Kuan Yew called me up. I was walking on the pavement in New York, and he said, ASEAN has to take a position. I knew we had to. I called a meeting, and I drafted a statement. And I said it's a statement of the 9th on the 10th. But at the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, some of my ASEAN colleagues said, why not make an ASEAN statement? So I looked at the Myanmar Foreign Minister, Un Nyan Win. I said, what do you think? Because I did not want to put him in the spot of speaking up against his own country. He said, no, make it an ASEAN statement. And when he said that, naturally, we were happy, but I was also worried for him. Immediately after that, the international media, and they were present in huge numbers, was going to come into the room for us to read out our statement. So I turned to Un Nyan Win and said, look, you don't have to be here if you don't wish to be. He said, no, I have a meeting, but my senior official will be here. So with all 10 of us in a row, all 10 flags flying, including Myanmar, we issued a statement, a very strong statement against the government in Myanmar. I must say I worried a lot for my friend, but it was fine, and we just had lunch in Hong Kong recently, and we recounted old times.
You said you worried a lot.
Yes.
For your friend.
You're a foreign minister of a country, and you agree to ASEAN as a whole, criticizing the actions of your government in a very strong way, and you associated yourself with that statement and became a party to it. So I was very careful not to put him in that position, or to pressure him. In fact, I, at all points, gave him a way out.
What were the kind of challenges to getting all the member nations to agree to that statement?
The other 9 was not difficult at all, because the feeling was widespread. And everyone felt that it was right for us to take a position.
Were they similarly concerned with how their colleague would take it?
I don't think so. I don't think so, no.
So why were you then?
Because I was in the chair. Therefore, I was in the position of unique responsibility at that time. Yeah.
So because you were in the chair, you felt that it was your responsibility to
yes, of course.
make sure that the
you have to be unified, to coordinate there. I'm sure if some other ASEAN leader in the chair, they might have accorded Myanmar the same courtesy.
Now, let's talk about ASEAN. Since we're still talking about that.
Yes.
How it's celebrating its 50th. I've read someone write about how, despite the challenges in the region, some of the uncertainties, some of the strife that's happened within the region, ASEAN is still the world's rising star. So I'd like to find out to what extent you actually agree with that statement.
No, we shouldn't be too self-congratulatory. We have many observers expressing their impatience with ASEAN's elliptical ways, that we spend a lot of time arguing, debating, and sometimes when we can't solve a problem, we never resolve it by voting. Then we say, oh, let's form an eminent principals group, or let's get officials to discuss it, or let's appoint a task force to give us recommendations. And that's how we get around difficulties. So it's a little elliptical and it takes time, and naturally people think that we are not so effective like other regional organizations, principally the EU. But that's part of our way of accommodating divergent views and giving people time to adjust their position. Then eventually we take a half step forward. And maybe after that we take a quarter step backwards again or sideways. But if you look at ASEAN, say in 5-year time frames, we have made enormous progress. Year by year, it's arguable whether we're always making progress, but over 5 years, over 10 years, certainly over 50 years, we have made huge progress. And that's because we're realistic and we are non-forcing. We are more fluid in the way we move forward. When I was Trade Minister, I had on my desk the Treaty of Rome, which established the European Common Market, 80 pages, very well written, inspiring document. And I dipped into it from time to time for inspiration about ASEAN. After that, the Common Market became the EC, then the EEC, and then the EEC, EC, then the EU. It became more and more complicated until today you have the Acquis Communautaire, which is a room full of documents. And even if you have a PhD, you won't understand all of it. The institutions are no longer comprehensible and therefore have lost the affection of ordinary Europeans. ASEAN must never be like that. We should keep it simple and easy for people to understand so that people can relate to its structures. If we try to do too much, it will become distant and it will no longer be enduring.
What do you think in the last 50 years was some of ASEAN's biggest challenges?
Oh, it kept the peace, it opened up our internal borders, it created a greater sense of being Southeast Asian. International forums today, in a room full of delegates from all over the world, you always find ASEAN delegates gravitating towards one another. And in the evenings when they go out for dinner, they always end up meeting each other by chance in the same restaurants.
But I'm talking about challenges and the problems that you felt that were the biggest for the region in the last 50 years.
We maintain our position by constant rebalancing. So China is emerging, India is becoming more important. The US has pivoted to Asia. There are new ambitions, there are problems. So the position is maintained by continuous rebalancing. It's not static. If you take a static position, it will fall. It's like on the trampoline, you're adjusting all the time. Then you're stable. If you say, no, I'm stand put, you have collapsed.
So it's this constant change that you feel keeps ASEAN successful. But the thing is, the last 50 years and the next 50 years, the contexts are going to be different. The problems are going to be different. Things are changing so rapidly. New issues are emerging constantly. Do you think ASEAN can continue on this trajectory of success over the next 50 years?
Not only continue on this trajectory, ASEAN is a necessity, and ASEAN will play a very huge role in creating the new Asia. The big plates, China, India, Japan, the US, they are hard, thick, rigid plates, and they move enormous forces. They all move into Southeast Asia. So we are like a buffer. We are soft. We are like a joint in the building where the forces meet. And because we are able to flex, so therefore we allow them to meet harmoniously. You take away this buffer, the whole thing will crash into each other. An ASEAN that loses its wisdom, that loses its internal flexibility, that takes sides, that is no longer neutral, will invite all the major powers to fight over Southeast Asia, and it will lead to disaster for the whole of Asia. It's because of this recognition that all the major powers want an ASEAN to be balanced and neutral and fair to everybody. Then they all want to be here, and then they all say, look, ASEAN in the driver's seat because we don't trust all the others to be in the driver's seat. You see? So ASEAN is a challenge. ASEAN is an absolute necessity.
What about some of the crucial lessons that you feel we can actually take away from the last 50 years?
Don't, by all means, influence each other, put pressure on each other, but don't interfere. Accept that each country is different with its own history, its own necessities. Brunei is almost an absolute monarchy. The Philippines has American-influenced democracy. Vietnam and Laos are communists. Cambodia went through hell and is now looking promising again. Thailand will always need the army. So we just accept people for what they are and not think that we can reform them in our own image. In fact, even if you spend a whole lifetime, you will not understand enough every one of your neighbors. So be respectful and listen and be humble. Then we can be together.
Yeah, it's precisely this diversity, right, that makes the region unique.
Yeah.
But do you see, under any circumstances, do you see this non-interfering stance being tested? Would you have any, under any circumstance, because you keep going back to this whole policy of non-interference, how you don't interfere in domestic affairs of your member nations, the other members. Do you have any circumstances that you feel this policy can be or should be changed?
We talked about Myanmar, which was the most difficult case. Earlier you alluded to the haze and how when forests burn in Indonesia, we get the haze. But it's important that we don't give our neighbors the impression that we're only concerned for ourselves. It's as if your neighbor's house is burning, people are screaming for help, and you're complaining only about the smoke that's entered your compound. Yeah, it looks as if we're only interested in ourselves and very selfish. Our first concern must be for the fact that our neighbor's house is on fire and see what we can do to help put out the fire. And then, of course, by doing that, we also help ourselves. But it cannot be that our discomforts become the principal driver of our foreign policy.
Okay, thank you.